Test implementation. Now, this is the process of developing and prioritizing test procedures, creating test data, and preparing the test harnesses and writing automated test scripts. Better said, this is when tests are organized and the priority of testing is put in order. This is when we actually implement those test cases, those test procedures, and the test data. It is of great importance to pick the right tests and run them in the right order. You have no idea how much harm you can do and how much time you can waste if you start with the wrong priority, if you check those unessential functions first, and then at the end of testing you have critical issues or very big surprises. Now, the importance of this even grows exponentially when we apply risk-based testing strategies that are based on prioritization. Besides this, we should also consider during test implementation the following items: delivery of the test environments, delivery of test data, what are the constraints, risks, and priorities that need to be checked, the test team readiness to start test execution, and to verify if the entry criteria is completed in order for us to kick off test execution. So the list that I just mentioned is very important. And I saw several cases where this is done at the beginning of test execution. And I would just like to say that that is wrong. You don't have the time during test execution to fix the environment, prepare the data, or other such activities like the ones previously mentioned. So do not forget, proper focus during test implementation will facilitate a proper test execution. In most cases, these test inputs are usually documented together with the expected results, the test steps, and the shared test data. So if we look in retrospect to our previous video where we discussed about test analysis and test design, where we discussed about preparing the test conditions and the test steps, now we enhance those steps with the proper level of detail, setting the expected results, input data, and other factors that we need to consider. Just like test conditions and test cases, even during test implementation, we will need to decide how detailed should we go. Do we keep it high level, or do we go into that deep level of detail where everything is documented so that we can pick anybody from the street, put them in front of a computer and give them the scripts, and they will be able to properly test the system or product that we have in our scope. Now, before we go into more detail about those detailed or high-level approaches, it is important that we do not count off the extensive implementation in preparation. For example, concrete test cases with proper level of detail can provide working examples of how the software behaves. This mainly means that this will help the users or the future users to better understand the system, and it can also help the training team in order to implement better training courses by moving forward with these detailed test scripts. For other cases, like when the tests are archived for a long term and they are aimed to be reused over and over again, especially in regression testing, these details will be very valuable so that anybody that joins the team can easily understand what is going on and how these things need to proceed. Besides this, domain experts are likely to be able to verify versus a concrete test rather than an abstract harness rule. For example, it's one thing when you know that if you input A, then it will go to decision B and output C, rather than the system will overall function okay. So this level of detail will also help better define the expectation, and it will help those subject matter experts in order to confirm if this is passed or failed. On top of this, with a detailed test implementation, you will be able to identify weakness in the software specification. This is where you will raise more questions related to the detailed design and the functional design, and you will be able to identify gaps or even defects found in the documents. As I said something about defects, let's make it clear. Some defects can be found only in production-like test environments. These are often very expensive to procure and very difficult to configure and manage. Similar challenges might be in regards to production-related data or actual production data that is required in order to replicate some issues. Again, test implementation is the stage where you prepare your environment. Don't forget about the data and properly assess if you need a production-like environment with production-like data, or if you can move forward for the specific test level that you are currently testing with test data and a not so production-like test environment. We talked about a lot here, and it's important to also highlight that test implementation is also key for those of you that are using test automation. This is the stage where the automated software testing scripting must take place. It should not be created during the execution timeline. Test implementation is where you need to make sure that the automated scripts are configured and ready. On top of this, now you should prioritize between manual testing and automation testing. You need to know exactly if manual or automated is going to take priority, what your team is going to focus on in order to make sure that they are prepared to progress and move forward to test execution. Lastly, during test implementation, you should acquire the testing tools that you need for test execution. Don't start execution and then say, oh, I need to implement that tool. No, make sure that they are ready and available within test implementation so that you can have a proper transition to test execution. A proper transition to test execution. Now, let's move to the actual test execution. This is the, let's say, most common and most often encountered test phase. Even if you have no experience with testing, you definitely heard of test execution. In order to define this, test execution is the software testing process of running a test on the component or system under test and produce actual results. We need to make sure that the following are finished before we start test execution. Tests are agreed, or at least tests are defined. The tools are in place. We just discussed about this during test implementation. And the tools, not only the testing tools, but also the test management tools are ready before we start. We also define the standards for the test logging and defect reporting and make sure that everybody involved in the process has this documentation and is aware of what needs to be done. Once this is done, test execution will begin once the test objective is delivered and the test entry criteria for test execution is met. As a test manager, your role, especially during test execution, is to monitor progress according to the plan, initiate and carry out control actions on guiding testing, and ensure that the logs provide an adequate record of relevant details for testing events. Better said, everything that is tested is logged, is tracked, is monitored, and controlled. During test execution, it is also important to keep a traceability between test conditions and the test basis. Focus on the test objectives and make sure that you have this appropriate level of test logging in order to be able to always refer back to what happened here, what was tested, how it was tested, by making sure that it is properly logged. In our next video, we are going to talk about test closure, test entry, and test exit criteria.